Coming up on Chasing the Natty, we're beginning our last-minute crash course series for all of you who need the skinnies on what you need to know to prepare for your college fantasy drafts in the next coming month. Today, we're starting with the quarterbacks as we discuss the top 36 in our Campus to Canton CFF teams rankings, who is going too high and too low in drafts, and what competitions we have our eye on during the fall camps. We've got all of that and more coming right after this.
GT go, breaks the tackle, he's 10, he's touchdown! Cook's gonna throw the deep ball, and Burton past the defense, touchdown Luther Burton! Milrow gonna run it again, got a lane, kicked in the turbo, Milrow, goodbye, touchdown Bama!
This is Chasing the Natty, a college fantasy football podcast. All right, welcome in everyone. This is Jared Palmgren, host of the Chasing the Natty podcast. I hope you guys had a wonderful ride to your work on this Monday morning. We are the College Fantasy Football Podcast on the Campus to Canton Podcast Network. You can find all of us on your podcast feeds and on YouTube every Monday morning during the off season at 6 a.m. sharp. If you want to support the great work we are doing here, head on over to campuscanton.com, subscribe there with any of our phenomenal tiers. You have content ranging on all sorts of college football games, whether it's college fantasy, Devy, Campus Canton, college IDP, college DFS, underdog contests. Really, if you play it, we've got content, whether that's tools, rankings, pretty much everything you need to succeed. If you want to get in touch for whatever reason, you can find me in the show on Twitter. I'm at CFF_Jared. The show is at Chasing the Natty, and the handsome fellow joining us today with a mustache that would make Ted Lasso jealous. He is a semifinalist for the Fantasy Sports Writers Association's College Writer of the Year this past year. It is Mr. John McKechnie from Rotowire. John, how are you doing today, man? Welcome to the show.
Doing great. Really glad to be on with you. I've been looking forward to this since we got it figured out, and feels like a long time coming. You know, we kind of swim in similar waters where we're huge college fantasy football heads. We're both Georgia Bulldogs. So it feels like a long time coming. Like this just makes a ton of sense, and I'm really excited to be here.
Glad to have you on finally, man. Again, you guys do great work over there with Rotowire. If I remember correctly, if anybody sees an update on their Fantrax account regarding one of their players, that is you guys that write those, correct?
That is us. We have a long-standing partnership with the guys over at Fantrax. We love them. Go Canada.
Go Canada. Very nice. So, again, we got a great show ahead for you guys today. We got a lot to get through here. If you listen to last year's Crash Course videos, you know that we have a ton to talk about. Again, this is very much the skinnies. Obviously, there's tons of content if you want to go more in-depth that you can go listen to. Again, we've been doing the show all year round if you want to go listen to other topics and stuff like that. But here, over the next couple of weeks, we are going to give you the skinnies. Again, a lot of you guys are preparing for your drafts. You're coming back into this. You haven't paid attention all off season. You're coming back in. You're saying, all right, just Jared, don't give me all the deep, like super deep stuff. I don't need to know who I drafted in my 30th round of my best ball draft. I just need to know who are the top quarterbacks, who are the top running backs, who are the top wide receivers, who should I be paying attention to, who's going too high, who's going too low. We'll talk about all of that today. We're going to, of course, start with the quarterback. So we'll get into that here in a second, but first, a couple of announcements before we get too far here. First and foremost, wrong page, Jared. First and foremost, if you guys are watching this on YouTube, make sure you like and subscribe. Again, we're doing great work here. We appreciate all of the ways that you guys show us appreciation. And those are two little things that you can do to help us out a ton. It helps us with the algorithm, helps us get in front of the faces of people who might be interested in joining college fantasy this time of year. So go ahead and help us out by doing that. In addition, other things you can help us out with are checking out our CFF guide over at campuscanton.com. It came out this past month. It has team profiles for all 134 teams, big breakdowns there. It'll talk about like where the team's at, what players you should be drafting. We got full depth charts over there for you to check out. Lots of system stats we've added this year so you can get better idea as to just how what you can expect out of the top receivers, top running backs, and top quarterbacks out of each of those teams. In addition, we got 200 plus player profiles in there. If I remember correctly, it's 48 quarterbacks, 60 running backs, 72 wide receivers, and 36 tight ends. Get kind of those full breakdowns. We also have some freshman player profiles in there, so check all that out. We got ADP, sample mock drafts in there. Lots of schedule analysis. If you want to know who's got the hardest schedules, who's got the easiest schedules, we break it down by Power 4 Power 4 and Group of 5 teams there, so go check that out. And we got so much more in there. We added a defensive section this year from our good friend Justice here at our team here at C2C, and he did a great job helping you guys get prepared for your leagues if you have DSTs. So, in addition to that, let's see what else we got here. Where is my? There we go. There's the button. Go check out the latest episode of Defending the Natty. It recently came out, myself and Nate Marquise. That is our CFF Dynasty monthly podcast on the Chasing the Natty podcast feed, exclusively there. This past month, we are predicting the 2025 first round of college fantasy dynasty leagues going forward. So it was a ton of fun. We agreed on maybe half the players, and then the other half of the show, we just kind of went off the rails and we're surprising each other left and right. It's a really, really good time. Lots of great discussions, so go check that out as well. In addition, a couple of other things out there. Go check out our CFF Draft live streams. If you're somebody who's listening to this and you're kind of wondering, all right, where's a good place that I can go in order to just kind of get a good idea of the player pool, go check out all of our live draft streams we've been doing every Sunday night on YouTube. We won't have one coming out this week. We'll be back next week with that, but we bring on a ton of great guests, tons of great discussion throughout the draft. We answer questions from the chat. Pretty much the best place, in my opinion, you can go to kind of get the quick rundown on just all things college fantasy for the most part. Then, in addition, last announcement here, again, not really something going on here at Campus Canton, but for those of you who have been excited about the underdog stuff recently, they have now added more competitions. They kind of tested the waters with some $3 drafts, and now they have up to $100 best ball drafts that you can get into over there. They got slow and live drafts over there, so lots of great stuff. I would recommend go checking that out and see what's right for you over there. John, I've been talking way too long, man. Let's go ahead and start talking about some of these quarterbacks. And as I kind of mentioned at the top of the show, we're going to talk about the top 36 quarterbacks, and we're going to take this 12 at a time, right? So, like, this is if you're in a 12-man league, this is likely one of these quarterbacks will be the first quarterback on your team unless you just completely punt the position here, right? So our top 12 quarterbacks in college fantasy this year are number 1, Caden Salter out of Liberty. Number 2, Byron Brown, quarterback out of South Florida. Number 3, Dylan Gabriel, former quarterback out of Oklahoma, now at Oregon. Number 4, we have Jalen Milroe, quarterback at Alabama. Number 5, Garrett Green, quarterback out of West Virginia. Number 6, Jordan McLeod, former quarterback out of James Madison. The graphic is wrong there. He is now at Texas State over there with G.J. Kinney and crew. Number 7, Avery Johnson, quarterback out of Kansas State. Number 8, Jackson Dart, quarterback out of Ole Miss. Number 9, KJ Jefferson, the former quarterback at Arkansas, now with Gus Malzahn at UCF. Number 10, we got Nico Iamaleava, quarterback out of Tennessee. Number 11, Jackson Arnold, quarterback out of Oklahoma. And then number 12, Kyron Drones, quarterback out of Virginia Tech. So, John, before we kind of get into the deep dive on some of these guys that we're going to really look at here, why don't you tell me, when you see these top 12 quarterbacks, what's kind of the main theme? Like, what do you kind of see just in general with the quarterback classes here?
Right. So, what comprises a great college fantasy quarterback, so one of these guys that is going to be the bedrock of your roster build is you got to have an offensive environment around them that is going to set them up for success, right? Like we need to have this guy be the engine of the offense. We have to have an offense that ideally we can project to score a lot of points, preferably be an up-tempo type of team. And if we can get some rushing production in there, all the better. I think that is definitely a through line with a lot of these guys that we're seeing here. It's not just going to be like the Connor Halliday, Wazoo, just throw it 600 some odd times like that. These guys probably, somewhere between 500 or so,
pass attempts, it would be on the upper end of expectations for a lot of these guys. But we're looking at some gaudy rushing production potentially here. I mean, like in a guy like Garrett Green, for example, maybe not the most gifted passer in the world, but just a stellar athlete, a guy who can put his head down, pick up the hard yardage, that type of thing. So that to me is kind of what stands out about these guys and why they all make sense as like really appealing top 12 type of options. And before we get too far down the road, you as a college fantasy football industry guy, what is your level of excitement with college football kind of entering the best ball space? Because best ball, I feel like, has really made this huge impact in the fantasy world, just generally. Baseball, football, obviously on the NFL side is massive as well. So are you, obviously you're a big like season long guy, big proponent of that, and DFS as well, but getting the best ball element into the college football scene, what are your thoughts there?
I mean, like, it makes it easier, right? Because college or just fantasy football in general during the season is a big commitment, right? You're having to think about who are you starting, who are you sitting with. College fantasy, that's multiplied by 10. Not only do you have just way different matchups, you're not just starting your studs every single week, right? You're also having to deal with the fact that we don't have injury reports. You have to sit there and try to figure out, all right, is my guy starting? Is my guy not starting? And it can get overwhelming for a lot of people. So I think it makes a lot of sense for best ball formats to become maybe not even a lot of us like the season long formats. We like kind of setting our lineups, but for the more casual person, it makes sense that best ball would kind of take over just a little bit more. I can see people very much moving forward, kind of having a hybrid league, right? Where you do more best ball style. Like, you don't have to set your lineups every single week, but you still have your waivers and everything. You can still trade and stuff like that. That way, again, it's just not as much of a time commitment moving forward. I think it's fine. Again, anything to grow the industry, I think, is really the way to go. Everything will still be there, right? Again, sit starts may not become as important moving forward, right? But, trade values, thinking about like who to draft, thinking about your waiver wire pickups, like all that stuff is still going to be there no matter how people kind of go about this. And best balls really make for a good off-season work, right? Like, you hop into a draft, $10, kind of throw the money in a pot, see who gets the money at the end of the year, right? It's low commitment. You're not having to think about it throughout the year, and people just kind of people like drafting. Like, and that's really what kind of makes best ball, I think, appealing to a lot of people, is you kind of get the draft, and then you don't really have any of the super hard stuff that comes afterwards. You get that rush, and then you're done, and then you see if you win the money at the end of the year. So I have no problem with it whatsoever.
Yeah, it's almost like fantasy speed dating, and I think to your point on like drafting, I think it's helpful to get reps, right? Because getting all your guys together to do your big league drafts like that. That's just a one-off thing, and depending on how many leagues you're in, like that, it's finite. But with best ball, like, you're able to kind of get this great ability of understanding that the ADP, where you can get certain guys, which guys are going a little too low, which guys you just kind of identify as a fade, and just having that rep just makes you a little bit sharper when it's go time as far as like your real drafts are concerned.
It also makes it easier for us, like, in the industry, right? Again, this turned into a bit of an industry conversation, but people love this kind of stuff, so I'll keep it going. Like, with ADP, right? Like, I would run mock drafts the first year that I was doing this, and it was fine, right? Like, you get people in there, and they were kind of slow. But once you kind of added that money element to it, and you kind of added that, okay, there's actually something to win here. Not only do you have more people joining, because, again, they don't feel like they're just kind of wasting their time. I mean, they're not wasting their time with just a mock draft, because, like you said, there's that element of kind of learning the player pool, learning like where people are going. But also, when there's kind of money involved, everybody takes it just that little bit more seriously, and you kind of get better data out of it. So pretty much almost all of our ADP is coming from low stakes best ball leagues, right? And some people might say, like, oh, doesn't that push up certain guys because they're better best ball plays than they are season long? Yeah, I would agree. But at the same time, right, like, you're not going to see as big of a difference with certain guys than you would potentially think you would, right? Because a lot of times, especially in a game as small as college fantasy is right now, people aren't really making those big distinctions between those two different formats.
No, no, that's exactly, dead on. And, having that skin in the game, like you mentioned there, I think makes the ADP more reflective, more meaningful overall. Like, back in my day, on like fantasy football and like ESPN, like you would have to do these mock drafts and they'd be bupkis a lot of the time, like people would just start screwing around by the time you get to like the fifth round. It's like, well, I learned nothing from this. And now that you're able to, have an actual monetary component to it, it makes everyone in that room take it all the more seriously.
No, for sure. Let's bring it back to these quarterbacks here. Again, you brought up some really, really good points about the kind of overall theme with the quarterbacks here. One thing that kind of sticks out to me is, again, we have our three top guys, Kaidon Salter, Byron Brown, and Dylan Gabriel. But in this next tier, there's actually quite a little bit, if we are honest with ourselves, a little bit of projection going on with some of these guys. We have three quarterbacks here in the top 12 that were true freshmen last year. They're all getting ready to start, right? They're all guys that were basically groomed to be starters by year two of which basically pushed out the longtime starter ahead of them with Jackson Arnold and Avery Johnson there. Nico Iamaleava, we all knew was going to be the starter at Tennessee once Joe Milton was done this past year, right? So I think that is something kind of interesting there, and something I think people are going to kind of be on the lookout this year with younger quarterbacks coming in as freshmen and everything, kind of seeing like who potentially has that opportunity to jump up and be guys that are coming in for next year, right? So just a little bit of an interesting theme there. And then, like you mentioned, every single guy here within the top 12 here has a rushing component to them. There are guys that are certainly better than others, right? Like KJ Jefferson, Byron Brown, Kaidon Salter, these are all guys with 1,000-yard rushing upside seasons, right? Versus maybe like your McLeods, your Greens, maybe you're looking at upside of like maybe 500 yards there. But regardless, like it's almost a requirement at this point if you're looking at it. When we get into the next range of guys, we'll probably see a few more pocket passers, but that's just college fantasy in general now. So, John, you got two guys here that you want to take a look at. I would love to talk about all 12 of these guys individually, but because we're doing the skinny here, you picked out two guys that you find the most interesting in this range. So why don't you talk about, you got two guys here. We'll have you talk about Nico first. You had Nico listed down, so tell us what you find so interesting about him.
So Nico, I'm buying in basically. Like, when it comes to following recruiting, like he's someone that we've known about for quite some time, like famously the $8 million man, right? And you look at this Tennessee system under Josh Heupel and what they've been able to accomplish on that side of the ball, and it's impeccable. I mean, like it's an offense that hums. You can plug in a player far less talented than Nico and still have plenty of success. Nico, though, is an elite talent, and I think that we have a situation here where it's an offense that you just can set your watch to. He is going to evolve this offense. Like I think we're looking at a season, I'm not going to say like the floor is going to look like what Hendon Hooker did in 2022, but I mean, I'm enough of a believer in Nico that when I was in Las Vegas the other week with the Rotowire guys, I went ahead and placed a Heisman bet on Nico, and I feel good about it because I just think that the numbers are going to be insane. He'll have his chance for his Heisman moments given that Tennessee schedule. Obviously, I think we both are probably a little bit nervous about that game in Athens this coming November, but beyond that, I think that Nico's going to be able to give you that rushing upside. We saw that a little bit in the bowl game, and I think as a passer, like we're looking at elite production as well. So I think that he's, despite the small sample size, really only, big sample would be the bowl game last year, but you got to project it out a little bit in this game. And I think that he absolutely has the goods to deliver for his investors this year.
I mean, I agree 100%, right? Like he's in my top 12 quarterbacks in my rankings, right? There's no reason not to believe that he can't do what Hendon Hooker did a couple of years ago. Hendon Hooker back in 2022 was a top 12 quarterback in college fantasy before his season-ending injury. And like you said, John, like I can't say that that's going to be his floor, but I can certainly say that's easily within the ceiling outcomes. And you want to talk about floor? People kind of clown on Joe Milton last year, right? Like, again, like, yeah, the offense wasn't nearly as good under Joe Milton as it was under Hendon Hooker, but Milton still finished as QB 29 in college fantasy last year. And to me, that is the floor. That is like, I don't see a world where Nico Iamaleava does worse than what Joe Milton did last year. And that tells me immediately, alrighty, so at worst, we're looking at a top 30 quarterback in college fantasy here, which is incredible to get in the top 10 quarterbacks here. And so I'm fully with you on Nico here. I think that, again, the talent speaks for itself. The system's great. Again, some people might say, like, okay, maybe it was Alex Golesh more than Josh Heupel, because Alex Golesh has been with Heupel for the longest time, and the offense took a slight dip last year without Alex Golesh there. I put more blame on Joe Milton than I do on the absence of Alex Golesh there, but c'est la vie. In addition to Nico, you had Kyron Jones as your other quarterback that you wanted to discuss here. John, what do you think about him?
So I was just very intrigued by his ability that he displayed down the stretch last year, and to kind of like take it back a few steps. This was like the COVID year. I think it was like the first game that year Marshall was playing, and Grant Wells looked awesome, and then he ends up at Virginia Tech, and I just totally thought that it was going to work out for him. Unfortunately, it did not. But Drones, he really showed something down the stretch there, and I think that Brent Pry, when Virginia Tech made that hire a couple of years ago, I think a lot of people, myself included, underestimated how big of a mess was left by Fuente, essentially, and we started to see the vision. I think start to come together a little bit last year with the Hokies, and I think that Pry himself is a very good coach, and I think he's going to put Drones in good position to succeed within that offense this year. I like the weapons around Drones, and I think, as far as guys that you're counting on for rushing upside this year, I think it's all there with Drones. And I like drafting an ACC guy because I feel like the ACC is pretty up for negotiation. Would you not? Like, I think the big three between Miami, Clemson, and Florida State, like there's vulnerabilities within each of those teams. And I think that leaves open the possibility of a dark horse like a Virginia Tech this year, making some noise in the ACC. So I just think that there are a lot of components in place for Drones to have the big season that makes him absolutely worth it at ADP.
I mean, I agree 100%. The thing that kind of kept me off Drones at first last year was, like, I'm like, okay, this is a guy that finished as QB 42 in CFF last year. So, like, and some people were like kind of jumping up and taking him early on in the offseason, saying like, okay, I'll take him in the QB 26 range and stuff like that. I'm like, it's kind of weird. And then I remembered, I'm like, oh yeah, that's right. He was greatly limited the first two games, and all of my rankings are based off of like how they performed over the total season points rather than like points per game or anything like that. Because I think points per game can kind of tell you the wrong story sometimes, especially if they have limited, sample sizes. And so, but again, with only missing two games, I figured I projected out, and had he played all 12 games as a starter, he would have finished as a QB 26, and that was his first year as a starter. Again, we typically see a decent jump for a lot of these guys in their second year. They get the full offseason of reps. They are the guy. There's a lot more confidence kind of coming in with their. In addition, like, Drones has some weapons kind of coming back here, right? They get Allie Jennings back. Lofton is another receiver that was kind of making some big plays down the stretch. They have their top back in Bashal Tutin, it looks like, and they have other guys they have behind him. I agree with you. There's a ton to like here. The one thing with, again, obviously I like investing in ACC quarterbacks just in general. Again, I'm looking at our toughest and easiest schedules in the Power Four based on our work over with CFP Winning Edge, and Virginia Tech not in the top 20 easiest schedules. And that list, if you're looking at it, is filled with ACC teams. And so Virginia Tech's going to have a little bit harder of a time than maybe some of the other guys, but also, again, Drones is a guy that I think you can lock in for 600-700 rushing yards, especially as the number one guy there. I'm bought in at this point with him being a top 12 quarterback for CFF.
Right. It's always funny to like see like the early season machinations of how people are drafting and how people weigh a smaller, sample from last year and how to project it moving forward. So like you said, it took some time for your eyes to adjust, but now that they've settled, we're there. We like them.
Alrighty. So again, you talk Nico, you talk Kyron. I picked out two quarterbacks that, in my opinion, are very similar, and it's almost kind of interesting to see like the slight difference between the two of them. And the two guys I'll talk about, I'm going to kind of talk about them here at the same time because of the fact they are so similar with their stories here. Dillon Gabriel and Jordan McLeod. They are two of the three transfer quarterbacks that are in the top 12 here. I've been very big on the most part saying like, if somebody transfers, even if it's to a good spot, there is a slight downgrade, no matter what you're looking at there, compared because there's no guarantee they fully mesh into that system. But the college fantasy community has really looked at Dillon Gabriel and Jordan McLeod, and these are two guys that were former top 10 quarterbacks from the 2023 season. Gabriel was QB2 at Oklahoma. Jordan McLeod was QB6 at James Madison. And seemingly they have transferred to perfect spots, with Gabriel going to Oregon, where Bo Nix was quarterback 2 in 2022 and quarterback 5 in 2023. And then you get McLeod transferring to Texas State, who made TJ Finley, of all people, quarterback 30 last year in college fantasy. And the previous year, if you look at Lindsey Scott's stats there at Incarnate Word, they made him look like a CFF god. Now, granted, that was at the FCS level. Again, we're still trying to figure out how much this G.J. Kinney offense will translate even to the Sun Belt level. But regardless, I just find it interesting that normally we in the college fantasy community are I've gotten to the point where we're kind of off transfers a little bit because of how much unknown that kind of comes with it here. But with Gabriel and McLeod especially, people seem pretty bought in here. I do find it interesting that given everything, Gabriel's still taken ahead of McLeod quite a bit. Now, granted, I think that is because of the seemingly safe floor there is with this Oregon offense, given the fact that Bo Nix has been top 5 quarterback 2 years in a row. Gabriel's top 2 quarterback last year. That everything should fit together well versus McLeod. We like Kinney's offense, but again, the best we've seen at the FBS level was quarterback 30 last year, so maybe that's it. But John, what do you think about these two guys? Like, how do you feel about tackling transfer quarterbacks as your first quarterback off the board in leagues? What do you think?
Right. So I think you laid out like a good rationale there, to where these guys are more the exception than the rule when it comes to identifying transfers and what they're going to do with their new spots. But in Gabriel's case, we just have a very long sample size, right? Like, he is someone that was a star during his time at UCF. Punched up a weight class at OU and did great, obviously QB2, like you were saying. And we step into a situation at Oregon where, like I was saying at the beginning of the show, like the offensive environment, the team context, I think is so strong in Oregon's case. I mean, I follow the Heisman odds very closely, and Dillon Gabriel earlier this summer was 10-1. And it's a time of year where there's nothing really going on the field. Now he's tied with Carson Beck as the betting favorite last time that I checked at plus 750. So it's like the people are buying in on this guy as a potential Heisman Trophy winner, and that doesn't always like a guy that wins the Heisman is obviously going to be amazing for fantasy, but like there's elements beyond that, and still you have Evan Stewart, who I think is, if he puts it together, the tools are pretty insane when it comes to him, and Tez Johnson is really impressive as well. Analyzing the draft last year, a lot of people are like, oh, I'm watching Troy Franklin, but this Tez guy, look out. And I think that, that there's a lot to like within the system as far as who he's working with, and Gabriel himself, I think, is a seasoned enough, proven commodity at this stage, so you're not so worried about him changing places yet again. And in McLeod's case, I think that you're buying the system. I think that there's a good enough track record in McLeod's case where you can talk yourself into that potential there. And if this offense does click, we saw it a couple of years ago where it was Baptist's like entire like offensive ethos, and turned the tops into like a must draft type of program for your fantasy team. So if they can make that similar jump at Texas State, like this looks pretty good as far as McLeod goes.
Yeah, I think you bring up a really good point about just how consistent Gabriel's been at pretty much every stop he has been with. Now, granted, a lot of that was him working with Jeff Lebby. He worked with him at UCF and at Oklahoma. Almost went to Mississippi State. Lebby was absolutely courting him as well when he was in the transfer portal. But when Oregon comes calling, it's kind of hard to pass that up, right?
Right.
Versus McLeod, last year was the only season we've seen McLeod do incredible things. Which again, props to Curt Cignetti, basically turning trash into gold there. Because before that, man, McLeod was rough at both South Florida and Arizona. Just not a great history there. And so you're kind of hoping we see a full turn from him here. We see a lot more of James Madison McLeod than anything we saw before that point, which, given the fact that the Wildcats went and grabbed him out of the portal when they could have grabbed a ton of different guys, I feel like it makes me feel pretty good about how they're feeling about him. So let's go ahead and hop into this next tier of quarterbacks, QBs 13 through 24. And in this range, we have Thomas Castellanos, the quarterback out of Boston College. At number 14, we have Haynes King, quarterback out of Georgia Tech. At number 15, we have Chandler Rogers, quarterback out of North Texas. At number 16, we have Seth Hennigan, quarterback at Memphis. At number 17, Cameron Ward, former quarterback out of Washington State, now at Miami of Florida. At number 18, we have Garrett Nussmeier, quarterback at LSU. At number 19, we have Brady Cook, the quarterback out of Missouri. Number 20, we have Grayson McCall, former quarterback out of Coastal Carolina, now at NC State. Number 21, we have Noah Fifita, the quarterback out of Arizona. Number 22, Jalen Rayner, the quarterback out of Arkansas State. Number 23, Preston Stone, quarterback out of SMU. And then number 24, Riley Leonard, former quarterback out of Duke, now at Notre Dame. So, John, looking at this tier of quarterbacks, what kind of stands out to you? Again, we'll get into your specific guys here in a second, but just in general, what kind of stands out to you among these guys?
There's a lot of, returning production here, like a lot of guys who have proven it over these last couple of seasons, so that, like in some cases, like we're not seeing tons of rushing upside, but in others, we certainly are. I think in an instance like Haynes King, he's someone that it took him a little while to get it going. And I think that Texas A&M was a little bit like politically motivated to make Connor Weigman work. So like it felt like they were never that, wedded to Haynes King, but that turned out great for Georgia Tech. And unfortunately for us, like, that was a very uncomfortable game that Georgia played against them last year. And I think the Tech is way under projected by the sports books as far as their win totals are concerned. So like I think that King is a really nice option. Castellanos really kind of made some strides last year and injected something into a Boston College offense that really needed that. Like if they lose Zay Flowers to the NFL, and you're like, are they even going to be watchable? And turns out absolutely. But for me, the two guys that I'm very interested in for this tier in particular, Garrett Nussmeier and Noah Fifita. I think in Nussmeier's case, going back to the Dogs, it just everything goes back to them for me. Remember watching the SEC championship game 2 years ago when Jaden Daniels goes out, and obviously like Georgia had the big lead, so they're playing a little bit more prevent style on their defense. But what really stood out to me was Nuss plays with no fear, and he likes to chuck it deep. And LSU obviously like they lose Malik Neighbors, they lose Brian Thomas, but I think there's reason to believe in a program like LSU that the receiver drop off isn't going to be that extreme. Obviously, what they have coming up with like Hilton and Lacey, like we don't know exactly if they're going to be able to replicate what BTJ and Neighbors did a year ago, but I think that Nuss himself has that ability to unlock it, and he might not give you the greatest rushing potential. We're not looking at a Jaden Daniels-esque season, but I think we're looking at a strong potential for throwing 30 plus touchdowns, really nice YPA, nice efficiency marks all across the board there. So I do like Nuss a fair bit. I also have a Heisman ticket on him. And then
before you get to Fifita, I have a couple of interesting notes here on Nussmeier. I mentioned this earlier in the offseason, but I figure I might mention it again here because it's been a while. But I find this it really kind of speaks to what kind of season Jaden Daniels had last year. So a lot of people, like you said, you're thinking like, oh, Nussmeier's a statue. Jaden Daniels ran all over the place. He had 1,000+ rushing yards last year, right? Like if Nussmeier just comes in and does what Daniels did passing, right, then we're looking at a huge drop off in fantasy production. No, we're not. We simply are not. Right? Let's remove Daniels' rushing production last year, right? So 1,100 yards and 34 yards, 10 touchdowns. That's 173.4 fantasy points, right? If you take that away from Daniels' total fantasy points last year, that would put him at 312.52 fantasy points for the entire season. John, what quarterback do you think that would put Daniels at if he just had his passing?
With 312.52 points. Gosh, that's got to be in the top 10, correct?
That is QB 10. He would still be in the top 10 quarterbacks. So if you're sitting there thinking like, okay, all he's going to do is just replicate what they did throwing last year, well, guess what? You got a top 10 quarterback just from that right there. Now, as you mentioned, John, right? We don't have the benefit of 2 first-round NFL wide receivers to throw bombs to over and over again. At least we don't think so, right? Again, I like Lacy. I like Xavier Thomas is a personal favorite of mine coming in from Mississippi State there. But let's say that LSU is only able to replicate 80% of their production in the aggregate from all those different receivers they have there, right? You're still looking at 250 points. You're still looking at a QB 33 on the year, which to me is like the floor of what Nussmeier could do, because I think you and I both agree Nussmeier's a better passer than Jaden Daniels for the most part. And so I love Nussmeier this year. I think he's an absolutely incredibly safe floor play that you can grab here as your second quarterback. I'll let you.
I do as well. I think, it's all there. I think, we've been waiting for Nuss for a little while. Like they brought in Jaden Daniels, of course, and, he had a great run during his time at LSU, but Nuss was pretty big recruit. And I think, his time within that program now getting seasoned, like he's ready to go. Like I think that this is going to be a huge year from him and from LSU generally. And I like their higher on the defensive side of the ball. So I mean, maybe that limits the shootout potential a little bit when it comes to LSU this year compared to last, where they just had to literally outscore everyone in order to win because their defense wasn't getting stops. Maybe that changes a little bit this year. But at the same time, like you said, floor. I think it's going to be there with that passing production from him. And then Noah Fifita, maybe I have a little bit of like just NFL draft brain going on with Fifita, but I think he's been such an interesting story. I think Arizona itself, I really wish that Fish stayed. I really think Arizona would be a pretty serious contender had he stayed, but I don't think that there's going to be a massive drop off there. And Tet McMillan being his number one guy, that's a good thing. Tet is pretty unbelievable, and if you just kind of build your offense around those two guys, I think that you have a pretty winning combination most weeks. You worry a little bit, and I do want to get your thoughts on this, like with Arizona and some of these other programs changing conferences, do you have like a level of concern about some like learning curve, some kind of bumps in the road along the way as they transition into a new schedule type of rhythm?
Yeah, I mean, I have the same concerns as a lot of people, right? Where you're not entirely sure like what to expect. Arizona's playing against Pac-12 teams. Now, granted, a lot of those same Pac-12 teams are coming over with them to the Big 12, so I actually think they might have an easier time than, say, SMU or Cal or Stanford going over to the ACC. ACC might be an easier conference overall, I would say, but they only get 2 other teams that are coming with them versus so many of the Pac-12 teams ended up going over to the Big 12 there to kind of offset the loss of Oklahoma and Texas there. So I think for a lot of these Big 12 teams coming over from the Pac-12, it's not as much of a concern. And then again, looking back at our CFF guide here, talking about the easiest schedules in the Power 5 or Power 4, we have Arizona's the 8th easiest schedule here. Again, they get New Mexico, North Arizona. They're at Kansas State, at Utah. Not great stretch there, but they get Texas Tech, BYU, Colorado, West Virginia, at UCF, Houston, at TCU, Arizona State. They kind of avoid some of the bigger boys in the Big 12 this year. And so I'm not super concerned about it. I like Fifita as a talent at the college level. Again, obviously, I think he's too small for NFL future or anything like that. But I think he'll be able to pick things off right. Like you said, his best friend and roommate, Tet McMillan, so they're a little concerned about kind of the language they're using with his injury situation. As we get closer and closer to the season, I'm kind of scared that he might miss the first game or two, depending on how he heals there. But if Fifita is able to keep going with what he had last year, right? He finished his QB 67 last year, but he only started the last 8 games. Over his last 8 games, he averaged 23.69 fantasy points. That was a pace that if he had played all 12 games, he'd be QB 22 on the year. And so I'm not super concerned about Fafita for the most part. Again, I do think that there is a potential that, just the Brett Brennan hire just doesn't work. And, maybe we see Fafita leave after the year, right? But I think for the most part, it'll be fine. Brennan typically plays to the strength of his roster. Like if you go back and look at 2019, right, back when he had Josh Love, they passed for almost 4,000 yards, 22 touchdowns. Obviously, you want more touchdowns than that, but Brennan's not afraid to go almost full air raid with his top quarterback. And if that's what gets them wins this year, I think that's what he's going to go with, and Fafita should be fine.
There we have it.
So, all right, those are your two guys that you found most interesting in this range. I'm going to talk about my 2 guys here, and I'll start at the top of the range here with Thomas Castellanos. Quarterback 11 in CFF last year. We have him rated as the QB 13 going into this year. In ADP, he is actually QB 17 in drafts, and I think he is the ultimate epitome of how much a coaching change can really throw a wrench into how much you project for a guy moving forward. So obviously, if you have not kept up with everything, Jeff Hafley, the head coach at Boston College, leaves to become the Packers defensive coordinator, and Boston College goes out and grabs Bill O'Brien, who was slated to become the offensive coordinator at Ohio State, and he quickly pivots over and becomes the head coach at Boston College once this job opens up. And this kind of leads to a lot of mixed emotions about what we can kind of expect for this offense moving forward. I mean, over the years, O'Brien's very much been a committee at running back kind of guy, spread the wealth around to different guys. Doesn't typically utilize dual threat quarterbacks a lot. So with all that kind of being said, a drop in Tommy Castellanos' value is pretty understandable. Like I mentioned, he's a QB 17 in drafts despite the fact that he was a top 12 quarterback in drafts last year. There's a lot of guys that are just honestly more projection based going ahead of him. But as this offseason kind of has come along, right, I find it interesting to kind of note that it seems like O'Brien's not really interested in rocking the boat too much with what was kind of already going on here with Boston College. Again, there's a lot of talk about him coming to Boston College to be close to his son, who is dealing with some health issues, and so that was more of his motivation than actually coming in and trying to revamp a program or anything. This job just happened to open up well for him. And from what it sounds like, again, his handprint will still be on this team, obviously, but retaining a lot of this roster, which, if I remember correctly, like Boston College is top 20 in the FBS in returning offensive production. He's going to keep with what's working. Again, the offense was looking good down the stretch, and if anything, not only is he not moving away from Tommy C as a starter, despite the fact that he's not the typical quarterback that O'Brien works with, he seems pretty interested in making sure that Tommy C improves his passing. And so that he's not kind of this, again, we talk about dual threat quarterbacks all the time, and when we say single threat, we typically mean passing, but let's be real, Tommy C last year, the reason why he kind of fell off towards the end of the year was because he's mostly a rushing threat, not really much with his arm, right? He had 15 touchdowns, but 14 interceptions. He barely passed over 2,000 yards last year. And so That's kind of exciting that if O'Brien doesn't take away his rushing and improves his passing there, it'd be a big season for Tommy Castellanos. So you're getting him at a discount here. What do you think about him, John?
So I think you touched on some interesting points there, and I want to kind of play a little devil's advocate because
you're mentioning devil's advocate. Let's do this.
Okay, here I am with the horns. When it comes to the fit within Bill O'Brien's new regime there, O'Brien, kind of an older school guy, obviously didn't recruit Castellanos. He's a returning guy, and man, the 14 interceptions, is there a potential here for a short leash? It's I don't owe this guy anything. I didn't recruit him. He just happened to be the quarterback when I got here. He is making these killer mistakes every single week. He's throwing as many picks as he does touchdowns. I'm tired of it. I want to see something else. I want to see what Grayson James or Jacoby Robinson have in store instead of this guy who just continues to put us behind the 8 ball. But another way is, these quarterbacks do develop. Like last year was like his first like big run as a starting quarterback, and there's going to be lumps along the way. But it is also concerning to me that after week 5, he didn't have a single game with multiple passing touchdowns like that. That to me, it's like even if the rushing is good, like we need a little bit more than that as far as the passing is concerned, in my opinion.
No, I fully agree with everything you had to say there, and that's kind of like why everybody got so hesitant when this hire was first made. But at the end of the day, Tommy C didn't transfer when he could have, right? It's not like Bill O'Brien, who's been very vocal in the past with his quarterbacks. Like Jalen Milroe talks about the fact that Bill O'Brien never wanted to start Jalen Milroe because he didn't consider Jalen Milroe a real quarterback. Boy, wait until he met Tommy Castellanos, who's probably even worse passer than Jalen Milroe, right? But despite that, Tommy C's still here, and Bill O'Brien talks about him pretty glowingly at ACC Media Days, right? Again, that's where he was kind of talking about the fact that like I've been working with him to improve his passing. And you talk about a short leash. Again, the unfortunate thing for Boston College, and maybe this changes in the future with Bill O'Brien recruiting there. You mentioned Grayson James, man. If you're concerned about Tommy Castellanos throwing the ball in the wrong place, Grayson James is not going to be much better. He was horrendous at Florida International at times there. So I think Tommy Castellanos is getting the benefit of the doubt a little bit because there's the guys behind him are like, even if you're concerned about Tommy C, like they're not much better. And at least Tommy C really gives you that rushing threat that maybe Bill O'Brien's just curious to actually utilize this year. I don't know. Again, he's from what I gather, Bill O'Brien's there just because the job happens to be there, and there's other things he wants to be there with instead. So maybe he just wants to have fun with Tommy C. Bit of narrative street there, but it's just the way I'm kind of seeing this, and I'm kind of buying a little bit more and more into Tommy Castellanos as we get closer to the season.
I dig it. I think your rationale is sound, and yeah, I think that was a good counterpoint there, where it's like, well, what's behind door
number 2 and 3 in Chestnut Hill? Probably not. There isn't like this Nico-esque guy like knocking on the door. Like we saw last year in Tennessee with Milton, where it's like, just pull it, like just go. Let's flip the switch and go. Like we don't have that concern so much when it comes to BC. But who else do you like in this tier?
Brady Cook is the other one I want to talk about here. Again, I like pretty much almost all of the guys in this tier. Again, we'll talk about some guys that are going too high a little bit later, but Brady Cook, I think, is a guy that people just kind of forget about, right? And they kind of forget that he was pretty dang good last year. Again, averaging 23.63 points per game, finishes at QB 23. He was averaging 25 points per game down the stretch. And there's a lot of things kind of going his way this offseason that are going to, I think, help him kind of get a bigger jump than what he got last year. Again, like I said, finishes QB 23. If you can kind of expect that again this year, here's some things that could boost up even higher. 1, Missouri is top 10 in returning offensive production in the entire FBS, and that's including losing their top running back in Cody Schrader. Speaking of him, it won't be the Cody Schrader down the stretch anymore, right? Cody Schrader really took over this Missouri offense, and why not? He was absolutely dynamite down the stretch for this team. But they bring in Marcus Carroll, they bring in Nate Noel, 2 guys coming up from the G5. And we saw with Cody Schrader, kind of takes guys 2 years to kind of really get going in this offense. And so maybe we don't see that immediate jump from those guys here, and they have to rely on Cook a little bit more. In addition, I keep referring to these strength of schedules that we have in our guide here, right? Among the top 20 easiest Power 4 schedules, there's only one SEC team that cracks the top 20 because, again, they're just that much harder than the ACC and the Big 12 conferences. But there's Missouri. They're 11th. They get Murray State, Buffalo, Boston College, Vanderbilt to start the season. Then they get Texas A&M. They're not on the road, not super great, but then they go to UMass. They get Auburn at home. They go to Alabama, who should have a worse defense this year, so hopefully there's a little bit of shootout potential. They get Oklahoma at home, and then they finish the season at South Carolina, at Mississippi State, and they get Arkansas at home. And so a very, very nice schedule for SEC play for Brady Cook there. I see plenty of scoring opportunities there. Probably the biggest fear I have with Brady Cook, and Ethan Skowers discusses this well in our guide, is that the quarterback drop-off behind Cook is pretty vast. And that might make the staff more hesitant to run him as much as they did last year. And so that might kind of bring him down just a little bit there. But for the most part, like, I want to kind of put Cook back out there because he's just a guy that people kind of forget about. And he'll fall pretty late in drafts sometimes, to the point where I've gotten him as my QB3 before. Now, granted, that's with some pretty early quarterback drafting there, but still, like, I want people talking more about Cook. What do you think, John?
Yeah, I think in Missouri's case, like you said, you miss so many of the giants in the SEC on this schedule. Like, really, the only game that truly scares you is probably going to Tuscaloosa, and getting Oklahoma at home is a nice touch there, but you're not getting Texas, you're not getting Georgia, you're not getting Tennessee, like, you're not getting Ole Miss. Like, that, it's pretty nice the way that this sets up. And I think a lot of the time people do forget about Brady Cook because Luther Burden is there. But what's good is to draft the guy that throws the ball to Luther Burden. I think that generally, as an axiom, I think is a good one to follow. But I think Cook, in his own right, is talented. I think he's a tough player. I think he's hard nosed, and I think you bring up like an interesting dynamic there between the willingness or unwillingness to run Cook versus what if that run game isn't humming between Noel and Marcus Carroll? Like, are they going to have a choice?
Mm-hmm.
Or are they just going to have to go ahead and say, you know what, Brady, like, go ahead and pick up those tough first downs and lay it out on the line. So that'll be like an interesting in-season thing for Drink to balance. But I think just in general, Cook is a nice, experienced player who really took a step up last year. And I don't think there's much reason, especially with the schedule being what it is, to say that development flattens. I think that we continue to see this thing go up and to the right in the good direction.
Oh, for sure. They're going to want to build off of the momentum that they were building last year. I mean, again, we keep talking about Georgia games, but again, they pushed Georgia in that game more than people, I think, kind of remember, right? Again, they had plenty of big wins throughout the season there. I think they're going to try to keep it going. Again, Drinkowitz is not going to want to let go of that recruiting momentum there. So,
no, exactly.
Let's go ahead and hit our last tier of quarterbacks that we're going to really discuss here. This is QBs 25 through 36. So these are typically guys that you are going to get on this will probably be your first backup on your bench here. And before I really get into it, I'll kind of say the theme here, which is risk. This is the tier where a lot of people are going to want to take their grand slam shots. They're going to want to sit there and take high upside guys that if you nail it, boy, you got 3 incredible starting quarterbacks throughout the year. But when I go through this list, you can pretty much put a asterisk next to every single one of these players in the fact that they all have one probably really big downside that pushes them down this far in the quarterback ranking. So we'll start with quarterback 25, Shedeur Sanders out of Colorado. At quarterback 26, we have Tyler Shuck out of Louisville, former Texas Tech and Oregon quarterback there. Number 27, Joey Aguilar, quarterback out of App State. Number 28, we got Jacob Zeno, the quarterback out of UAB. Number 29, Miller Moss, quarterback out of USC, replacing Caleb Williams over there. And number 30, we have Matthew Sluka, a new name to college fantasy, former Holy Cross quarterback coming up from the FCS. He will be expected to start at UNLV. And number 31, we have Jalen Daniels, quarterback out of Kansas. And number 32, we have John Mateer, quarterback out of Washington State, expected to potentially win the job there and take over for Cameron Ward. And number 33, we have Lenore Sellers, quarterback out of South Carolina. And number 34, we have Tucker Gleason, quarterback out of Toledo. Number 35, we have Giovanni Lopez, the quarterback out of South Alabama. And at number 36, we have Josh Hoover, quarterback out of TCU. John, I already kind of gave my thoughts on the fact that every single one of these guys, you can put a big asterisk next to them and say there's a big drawback to every single one of these guys. But what are your kind of takeaways from this tier? What do you see?
Yeah, there's in like Shuck and in Daniels's case, we know two things. We know that when they're healthy, they can absolutely produce. And I think, with Shuck moving to Louisville, you feel good about what that system can do for a quarterback's numbers. But we also know that when they're healthy is really an even bigger storyline with these guys constantly getting dinged up. Daniel's like the concerning shoulder issues, that type of thing. So you're just like, I'm a little bit leery on this. So you worry about that, but there's, like you said, I think you framed it well, where this is where you can kind of take your home run swings. And for me, like the two guys that kind of stand out, Jacob Zeno at UAB. You can accuse me of being too in on guys that used to play for Baylor. Given the Kyron Drones shout out earlier in the show, but Zeno, like, he's just like this big athletic guy, and I like buying those type of traits. I think UAB doesn't have a murderer's row as far as the schedule goes. We're talking about a guy who started and played in 11 games last year, so, and threw for over 3,000 yards. We'd love to see the rushing get unlocked a little bit more. It's a little bit underwhelming to have just 168 rushing yards from him in total. But even still, I think that there's enough there with Zeno where I think that there's at least floor. Maybe the ceiling isn't crazy, but like I'm not worried about him losing that job at UAB. And Mateer is on the other end of that, right? Where we don't even know if he's going to win that job. That's going to be settled here in the next few weeks. But I like investing in Washington State's offense just as a general rule of thumb. And if he's the guy that's starting there, and we're looking at a Wazoo team that should have a pretty favorable schedule now that the Pac-12 is effectively dissolved outside of them in Oregon State. So, we're talking about Wazoo playing essentially a Mountain West schedule, and I think that sets up pretty nicely for him. So again, you're going to have to keep an eye on the job battle, but if he is able to win this job, I think that people that invest in him are going to end up being pretty happy about it.
Yeah, I'll give my thoughts more on John Mateer later in the show when we discuss the quarterback competitions, because I do think that is the singular most important quarterback competition in the country going into the fall regarding college fantasy. Zeno is another one that I find super interesting, right? Mostly because, again, you're looking at his stats from this past year, 3,000 plus passing yards, but only 20 touchdowns. Like, that is a unfortunate ratio right there. Typically, again, if you're passing for 3,000 plus yards, you're at least looking at 25, 26, 27 touchdowns. But Zeno, man, multiple games here. I'm looking at it where, let's see, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5 games where he had 200 plus passing yards and and one or less passing touchdowns. Just very unfortunate games. Granted, Jermaine Brown Jr. was absolutely incredible last year, right? And so he probably sucked up a lot of those. And we're looking probably at a bit more of a committee approach this year between, Isaiah Jacobs, Lee Beebe, guys like that we like. But there's not going to be that one main guy that the staff is going to be like, all right, we know for a fact this guy's going to get a touchdown. Maybe that changes as we get into the season. But I very much think that there is a ceiling to Zeno that we haven't fully seen yet. Because, let's see, he's quarterback 35 last year. Let's add 5 touchdowns. Let's say he gets 25 touchdowns this year, replicates his touchdown numbers from last year. Boom, that puts him already in the top 24 quarterbacks. That puts him right back into that tier where you're going to be very, very happy with him on a week-by-week basis there. So I like the Zeno call out there. And again, we'll talk a little bit more about John Mateer, and also I've talked to a lot of Wazoo this offseason, and so I'm sure some of my listeners are like, oh my God, don't talk about the Cougs again. The guys I find most interesting in this tier are one, Joey Aguilar, who finished as quarterback 13 last year, and here he is down at quarterback 27. In our rankings, he goes roughly around that range as well in drafts. And dude was just Mr. Consistent last year, right? Only one game below 20 points and only one game above 30 points. He was the guy you could plug in every single week, and you were pretty happy with him for the most part. Again, did he win your weeks? No, but he didn't lose your weeks at all. And so my main thing that I find most interesting about him, and this is something that Chris Moxley brought up to me a couple of weeks ago, and quite frankly, I think it's partially why he kind of falls a little bit. I think it kind of stuck with people. Is among the top end of quarterbacks for college fantasy this year, Aguilar had the highest percentage of turnover-worthy plays at 5.1% of his passes, and that was significantly higher than pretty much anybody else in this range. He got away with a lot last year. He only threw 9 picks on the year last year, and quite frankly, he could have thrown upwards of 12 to 15 of them. And a lot of times, those passes would go on to be drives in which he would get touchdowns, right? And so I think that if he doesn't improve that, there is a potential come back down to earth potential here for Aguilar. In addition to that, right, last year's running game for App State was good. Like, I'm not going to say it was bad, but like there wasn't that kind of main guy, right? There wasn't that guy they could rely on. They actually thought that Aguilar's passing would win them more games more often than not. What happens if the likes of Kanye Roberts really becomes a workhorse for this offense this year? And suddenly 5 touchdowns that would have normally gone to Aguilar last year suddenly go back to Roberts in the run game, right? This is all in addition to the fact that Aguilar, while not a statue per se, he doesn't really offer a ton in the rushing production. They don't run him around the goal line a ton. He had 306 yards rushing last year, 2 touchdowns on the ground. So maybe that improves this year, but Joey Aguilar is an interesting one here. Some people might be wondering, like, he finished well last year. Why is he kind of falling down to this range? I think those are the reasons why. The other interesting one... Oh, go ahead, John.
Yeah, I think you laid it out well there when it comes to Aguilar. Like, he's someone that, like, I write the DraftKings main slate article every week over on Rotowire, and like anytime that App State was on it, like he just always fit as like a really nice value play.
Someone that you could kind of set your watch to like 3x value on whatever his salary was. But yeah, he wasn't like a slate breaker type of guy most weeks. But, you know, App State would get itself, you know, a little bit different than what we're used to seeing, like a little bit more of those high scoring need to play catch up type of scripts there. And you know, he succeeded, but yeah, the turnover, you know, that stuff can correct in his case in the wrong way. So that is going to be a huge key for him is limiting those turnovers and putting himself in those dangerous situations.
So the other guy I find interesting in this tier is Matthew Sluka. Again, of all the quarterbacks in the top 36, he's the only one that's coming up from the FCS level. We kind of mentioned it before, right? Us college fantasy folks are a little hesitant when it comes to guys jumping up in competition, right? Guys coming from the G5 to the Power 5, guys from the FCS coming up to the G5. So people might be wondering, like, all right, this Sluka guy, I've never heard of him before. What's so exciting about him? I'll tell you exactly what's exciting about him. Last year at Holy Cross, he ran 169 times for 1,300 yards, or for 1,312 yards and 9 touchdowns. That's what's exciting about him. Here's the part that people aren't so excited about. Last year, he passed 198 times, so less than 200 times, for 1,737 yards and 20 touchdowns. So this immediately kind of creates this conundrum, right? Sluka's going to UNLV. This is a system we like. This is Brendan Marion's go-go offense. It was good for us at times with Jaden Mayava last year. We were kind of hoping we'd get Mayava again this year, but now he's off to USC, right? And so they needed somebody to kind of come in. Now, Haj Malik Williams came in during the spring. He actually looks pretty good, so I don't say it's a foregone conclusion that Sluka wins this job, but based on every UNLV reporter that I've kind of listened to and talked to, they are pretty convinced that Sluka will get this job. So that kind of answers one of the questions, right? Like, will Sluka win the job? Most likely, yes. But two, again, going back to those passing numbers, right? Those passing numbers are quite worrisome. Less than 200 attempts, less than 2,000 yards, only 20 touchdowns. Like, I don't know if I really like that. So what was causing those? There's kind of 2 lines of thought here, right? Was it the scheme at Holy Cross? Because they're just so dadgum good at running the ball between Matt Sluka and their running back, Jordan Fuller? Or is it actually some kind of passing limitation with Sluka? I fall on the former. I really do believe that Chesney, the head coach there at Holy Cross, now at James Madison, very much changes his offense greatly year to year, depending on what they need. And last year, they had a game breaker in Sluka's running game and Jordan Fuller, their running back. There was no real need to pass a ton. I highly recommend everyone to go back and listen to, I think it's episode 176. It was back when I did with Nino Brown, the Hot Takes episode. Around the hour and 8-minute mark, we discuss UNLV. And I go in depth about why I don't think that Sluka's passing passing abilities are that much less than Mayava. In fact, they might be improved in some areas. It's literally just passing attempts that changes the perception there, right? And in addition to that, like I would list out all the stats here, but again, we don't have time for all that, so I recommend you go check out that. But some people like say, like, and they're looking at the 1,700, like, well, there's clearly something there. Well, guess what? The year before, in the same school, same coaching staff, Sluka passed for 1,500 yards and 26 touchdowns. So there's clearly not a major issue there if he's asked to throw the ball more. And so I'm telling people, like, if you're a believer in this offense, I don't think that, like, Sluka coming in should be the thing that makes you start hesitating here. I think he'll be fine. I think he'll be somebody worth taking here. Because, again, man, that just the possibility of somebody who can run for 1,300 yards in a season, I think it's too much to pass up as a QB3. What do you think, John?
That's the chasing the natty difference right there. We got some holy cross offensive analysis. Like, that's what I'm talking about. I love that. But yeah, I mean, it seems like we have a starter kit of something that can make that transition from the FCS to the FBS level and have some success. And I like the fact that he's flashed the ability to do both. And you know, obviously more recently, he was killing it on the ground last year. But yeah, I mean, that's an almost bizarre stat line to throw for just 2,500 yards and 26 touchdowns. Like that's such a high percentage of touchdowns per pass attempt. It's kind of like boggling my mind a little bit. But beyond that, I mean, I think that UNLV in and of itself, if they're pragmatic and play to Sluka's strengths, I think that this sets up really nicely for him. So I'm glad you kind of ID'd him from this tier.
All righty. So that's our top 36 quarterbacks. Again, we got some more stuff to run through. We'll kind of run through this a little bit quicker because we're already at the hour and 7-minute mark. So next thing we'll talk about here is some quarterbacks that are being drafted too high. So John, I'll throw it over to you first, man. Just kind of run through your 3 guys and kind of give the skinnies on why you think they're being taken too high in drafts.
So with Daniels, again, like it's just a durability concern. I just worry about his ability to give you a full season or even close to it. You're almost expecting him to like miss at least 2 games, like just going in, and you'd almost consider that a win. And that's not the kind of player that I like to invest it with that type of draft capital, with him being checking in as the QB 30. So a little bit hesitant there based on the injury history. And in Jackson Arnold's case, like I understand it, like Oklahoma is just kind of a machine that's going to probably turn out pretty good fantasy production from its quarterback, no matter who's back there. But I don't think the system is quite as amazing as it once was in like the heyday, the Baker Mayfield, Kyler Murray type of years. And I think that last year was more about Dylan Gabriel than the offense itself. So I worry about a little bit of a drop off, and you know, maybe there's that chance that Jackson Arnold isn't as good as advertised. So I'm going to let other drafters take that risk instead of myself in most cases. And then our guy Carson Beck, we love him, but I think for fantasy, he is there's a cap there. I do think that with Georgia's tough schedule, like there are going to be more weeks where he has to play in the all 4 quarters in these high scoring games. You know, like I think that Ole Miss game is going to be crazy. Tennessee, Alabama, Texas, like all of those games like have the potential to really pop. But you know, we're not going to get the rushing production that we want out of the quarterback. And you know, I just worry about those games where we see him with a you know, towel on his head, just chilling out on the sideline, and it's midway through the 3rd quarter. It's like, oh well, I guess that's it for this week on Beck. So I worry about that a little bit too much to fully invest. I think that, you know, it's interesting where you note the ADP on him is QB 28, but the ranking is QB 44. So I think that that's a pretty interesting chasm, and I think that that's what you want to listen to here. Beck, obviously a household name for a big program and everything like that, but I think when we get into the nuts and bolts for fantasy, it might end up being a little bit disappointing for his investors.
Yeah, like Beck didn't have a horrible season for college fantasy last year. Like he was a top 35 quarterback for college fantasy last year, and so you're hoping, like you said, with those additional tougher games and keeping him in the game longer, being forced to score a little bit more, then maybe he can make that jump up and kind of get you that return on QB 28, but I still think that's roughly his ceiling for the most part there. Arnold's the one I probably disagree with you on, mostly because I think that offense is going to continue humming for the most part. Again, they lose Jeff Lebby, obviously, to Mississippi State, but they bring in Seth Luttrell, who gave us incredible North Texas offenses for years, and so I'm hoping they kind of keep it going there. He's got great weapons around him. Probably the biggest downside with Arnold is I don't think he'll be as much of a rushing threat as Dylan Gabriel was, and that's probably going to limit his ceiling there just a little bit. So maybe I'm a touch high. I personally have him ranked at QB 8. ADP's got him at QB 13. I have a ridiculous amount of Jackson Arnold this offseason, so maybe that comes back to bite me. And then Jalen Daniels totally get him, right? Again, myself and ADP are in lockstep. We're both QB 30, but I totally get somebody who looks at that and says, "Yeah, the upside's great, but I can't go with the injury history." My three guys, real quick, I'll run through Shedeur Sanders, quarterback out of Colorado. His ADP is QB 12. I have him QB 33. Yeah, I'm a hater. Hell yeah. In addition to the fact that I just don't really like the culture around Colorado right now, but like people continue to forget that Sean Lewis is gone. They bring in Pat Shurmur to be the offensive coordinator now, and so if you followed him along during the NFL, that's not a super exciting proposition. Even before that, Sanders was kind of on a downturn to finish last year. He was QB 8 through week 8. By week 12, he was QB 27. Defenses were really starting to kind of figure him out, kind of figure out that offense. Maybe that kind of partially what pushed Sean Lewis out the door as well, but there's also very petty reasons there, right? In addition, part of what really caps Sanders' ceiling is the sack issue, right? He was the most sack quarterback in the country last year. That offensive line was dead last in the country when it came to sacks allowed. I don't think that's going away. Yeah, they bring in some new guys, but based on what they were able to do last year, like I don't think they know how to gel an offensive line together with these kind of mismatched pieces. And so I'm very much out on Shedeur Sanders. No way am I taking him as my first quarterback off the board. Shoot, I'm hesitant to take him as my third quarterback off the board. Quinn Ewers is another big one. Again, his ADP is QB 26. Quarterback 57 is where I have him ranked, kind of very similar to Beck here, except for the fact that, honestly, Ewers' history here kind of showcases, in my opinion, just a very limited ceiling here. 2022, he was QB 108. He missed 3 games, so he was on pace for QB 80. Not great. 2023, he finishes quarterback 59, missed 2 games, so therefore he was on pace for QB 33. A little bit better, obviously, but that Texas offense, in my opinion, was humming along as pretty much as best as it possibly could, and Ewers was still only reaching that ceiling of QB 33. That's just not what I want in my third or even sometimes second option at quarterback. Like I said, this is kind of that range where I would be wanting to swing for the fences, get that guy that'll pop out of nowhere and get into the top 12. He gets a revamped receiving core this year, but even so, that's new chemistry has to build, and nothing guarantees that they're going to be able to replace Xavier Worthy and A.D. Mitchell there. And as much as we've said in the past, like, oh, if only he can fix his deep ball passing, like his ceiling could be unlocked. Well, it doesn't look like that's happening. 2022, he was 30% completion, 20 plus yards down the field. 2023, he was 34% completion in the same range. Some of that was due to Xavier Worthy dropping passes, but Ewers shares quite a bit of blame there as well. He has just straight up missed his guys downfield at the time. So I'm not investing Ewers at my second or third option at quarterback. Last guy here, sorry Felix, but I gotta question the Rocco Beck love right now. His ADP has gotten up to quarterback 34 in drafts. I have him ranked at QB 61. He played in all 12 games last year and finished as QB 57. He averaged 17.64 fantasy points per game. There wasn't like this massive second half bump that you can point to and say like, yeah, this beginning of the season was bad, but he got a lot better down the stretch. No, he went from 16.8 in the first half of the season to 18.4 fantasy points per game in the second half. Not a huge jump there. I like his receivers. I like the weapons, but he had them last year. He utilized them well. He had 2,600 passing yards and 20 touchdowns. So that's not a bad passing stat line. I don't really see much more room to grow because if you look over the last couple of years, we haven't seen quarterbacks go that much more than that. Yet you have to go back to 2019 Brock Purdy in order to get a stat line that's significantly better than that. He'd have to increase his overall fantasy production by 17% to get to the QB 34 price that he is being drafted at. I really don't see where that comes from, especially if Al-Busama returns us to form on that top end running back for Iowa State. That's going to take touchdown opportunities away from a guy like Rocco Beck. So all of this is for a guy that ran for just 109 yards last season. There's just not a high ceiling Rocco Beck. I'm not taking him at QB 30. So.
No, I think Beck is kind of just a milk toast type of guy. Like I'm with you where it's like I don't really see the upside appeal to where like in that range you want to be able to talk yourself into like here's how it could go crazy for him. There's really no way in which I can bend my mind into that pretzel where I'm like, oh yeah, Beck's about to just cook. And then Shadur Sanders, he's like a good litmus test for like, do you know ball? Because like I feel like most smart people in the industry are kind of poo-pooing his ADP, and I think rightfully so. I think that there's a lot of red flags with his game with Colorado, just generally, so much in and out as far as the talent outflows and inflows when it comes to Boulder, and just I don't know. I'm having a hard time justifying where he ends up going. And yours, he's the only one that I would probably slightly disagree with, but I think you bring up a good point. I mean, you lose A.D. Mitchell, you lose Xavier Worthy, you lose Jatavian Sanders, Jonathan Brooks is gone, and C.J. Baxter, like I think he's talented, but like, is he going to be as good as Brooks was last year? That's TBD. So, it's a tough schedule for them. They got to go to the big house. They play against Georgia. Like, it's going to be a tough road to hoe, especially with the new weaponry that he's going to be working with. Obviously, at Texas, you have high end guys, but at the same time, like, you do need to develop that rapport. And this is really the make or break year where we kind of find out, was Ewers really worth being, basically, other than Vince Young, I believe, like the highest rated recruit of all time. This is where we see it. And, maybe it's there, but I think that the 2 years in which he's really been the starter at Texas, it's been good, not great. And I think that we're going to see more of that than him necessarily taking that massive leap.
All right, enough poo-pooing, guys. John, let's go talk about some guys we think are being drafted too low. I'm very curious to hear your first guy here, because this is very much a counter take compared to a lot of people I know right now who are really concerned about this guy's schedule. And so I'm excited to hear what you have to say. Give me your three guys that you think are three quarterbacks that are being drafted too low.
I like Haynes King. We're talking orders of magnitude here. So he's QB 15. You have him ranked as QB 12. We actually have him in. We'll see if this sticks as we continue to kind of like refine our projections. But we have him as a top 5 guy potentially. I think the schedule is a legitimate concern to bring up in King's case, but I think he showed a lot of promise last year. And I think that, this is an offense that you kind of got to readjust how you view Georgia Tech and the way that they run things on that side of the ball now. It's a little bit more fantasy friendly for the quarterback through the air in particular than obviously it was way back when under Paul Johnson and Jeff Collins. But I'm a believer in the potential there. I'm a believer in the talent. I think that the weaponry around him is solid enough to where I'm willing to take that plunge. I think that Georgia Tech just generally is a little bit. I think they're a little underrated this year. Like, again, I think their win totals set at like 5.5. So basically, do you think Georgia Tech's a bowl eligible team this year? I do. I think King is going to be able to return nicely for the people that draft him where he goes. In Taylor Green's case, always just super enamored with him at Boise State. I think that his highlight tape is some of the best out there, but there are warts to his game, and going to Arkansas, punching up a weight class, like those are legitimate, gripes against him potentially. But I think that if they're able to unlock him a little bit and get the passing down, in addition to his rushing ability, like I think this ends up being a pretty nice season for Taylor Green. And then this is the heat check one. I like Anthony Calandria. I like the way that guy plays. I think that he has tons of, and this is not numerical. This is just vibes, but he's got a lot of moxie. He's got the goldfish brain where, like, if he throws a pick, doesn't care, goes back out there, he's going to chuck it deep again. Like, I like that element to his game. I think Virginia's been, it's sort of like the Wolverine meme where, like, I miss the Bronco Mendenhall Virginia team so much. I look at the picture and I weep, thinking about the days of Brennan Armstrong going bananas a couple of years ago, but I digress. But Calandria, I thought, like last year, anytime, I know that Tony Muskett is a cool name, but man, like, what were they doing with that? He was just unplayable, and Calandria just gave such like a jolt to that offense. So he's someone that the market doesn't really seem to be in on. There isn't really a firm market for him. Generally, he's getting, basically not drafted a lot of the time. And I think as far as like knowing that as the premise, knowing that you can get him like towards the very end of your draft as sort of like a roster fill-in that could end up with some upside. Like I think Calandria has those type of goods to at least outperform where he's being drafted, and probably give you a couple weeks in the best ball world where he ends up in your starting lineup.
I got many thoughts on all three of these guys. No, Haynes King, right? I have him as QB 12. ADP's got him down to QB 15, so I'm even a little bit higher than consensus. So I'm kind of with you a little bit. Like, I think people are kind of going a little bit too far with this, but there's very real concerns, right? You're looking at 3 bye weeks with your top quarterback. Not great. And everybody's got 2 bye weeks this year, but like to have a third one in addition to everything else is rough. His end of year schedule is horrendous. Like, holy crap, you cannot draft Haynes King and bet on him getting you to a championship, right? In week 12, you have a bye. In week 13, you have NC State, one of the better defenses in the ACC. And then you have Georgia in championship week. So my only caution to people, if you're taking Haynes King, obviously there's things to like, right? He was QB 8 on the season last year, right? You're talking like 30, 35 points every single week from this guy when he plays. That's great. But know what you're buying and plan accordingly. Green, you kind of brought it up already about him kind of punching above his weight. That's kind of my main concern here, right? I wasn't super impressed with him at Boise State. Obviously, I love the rushing ability of any quarterback, but I didn't ever really think when he transferred out of Boise State, like, yes, this is a power 4 level quarterback. I cannot wait to see where he lands. I think that, again, he lands at Arkansas. They could unlock his ability, especially with Bobby Petrino there. He's done well with some dual threat quarterbacks in the past there. But I'm personally kind of staying away. He's not really somebody I seek out in drafts. And then Calandria, I'm with you, man. I love the dude himself. I love the way he just plays effort ball. He just chucks it deep, and we'll see what happens, especially when you got a guy like Malik Washington, who's just that much better than everybody else on the field at the time. Problem is, I hate this coaching staff. And I legit think this coaching staff is going to make a terrible decision here, and they're going to put Tony Muskett back out there.
I don't like hearing that.
That's what it sounded like, unfortunately. And I'm just like, well, Landry, what are you still doing there? You should have transferred out in the spring as soon as you heard that was even an option, because you're legitimately just that much more fun. Now, granted, he threw a lot of picks. Like, I kind of get it, but still. Not, again, Calandria, again, you're getting him as what, your QB 7 here? Like, because he's QB 66 in ADP. Like, I'm not going to knock anybody that just wants to take a shot on a guy that they like. So, I'm not going to knock too much there. My 3 guys here, I'll throw it out here. Tucker Gleason, man. I didn't realize how low he was going in drafts until I saw his ADP. He's going QB 62. I have him ranked as QB 39, and I know for a fact we have him ranked in our top 36 there. I think he's QB 34 in our consensus ranking, so I'm not even the highest one in our team here on him. And golly, there's a lot to like here. I mean, DeQuan Finn in the last couple of years has been great for Toledo. In 2022, he finishes QB 34. But that was with missing 3 games. He's on pace for QB 7 on the year in 2022. Last year was a bit of a downturn. He played all 12 games, but only finished QB 27. He did play hurt quite a bit last year, so maybe that was part of it. But now Finn's gone. He's off to Baylor, so clearly they think he's a power 4 level quarterback there. Well, we have Tucker Gleason, who used to be at Georgia Tech, coming down, former power 4 quarterback. He's been in the system for 2 years now, and we got a pretty good look at him in 2022. He passed for 832 yards, 8 touchdowns with a 46.6% completion rate. Obviously, that's not great. He also ran 32 times for 237 yards and 3 touchdowns. So that's a pretty good look there. He fits into the system well. He can run. He can pass pretty decently outside of that completion percentage, right? But in those 3 games, he averaged 31.06 fantasy points. That is QB1 type numbers. So I don't care if he's missing over half of his passes. He's getting enough work there in order to make it work. We didn't get as much of a look at him in 2023, but Finn did stay healthy, or because Finn stayed healthy. But when we did see Gleason, he looked improved. He had 66.7% completion rate. He increases yards per attempt from 7.1 to 9.5. So I'm hoping, fingers crossed, that kind of stuff stays the same. In addition, the Rockets obviously lose a lot when it comes to quarterbacks and running backs. Obviously, Penny Boone's gone. DeQuan Finn's gone. What isn't gone is their entire receiving core. They returned 88.5% of their wide receiver and tight end snaps from last year. So Gleason should be pretty familiar with all of his targets, should make that transition pretty easy here. The main thing that's kind of dragging Gleason down a little bit for me is they lose all their linemen, which is going to be one of two things, right? Either Gleason's going to be fantastic because he's going to be scrambling all over the place, picking up tons of yards, or it'll be detrimental because he's going to get the Shedeur Sanders treatment and he's just going to get sacked over and over again. So regardless, he's going like 30 quarterback spots too late, in my opinion, or at least 20. So very much a value there. DJU is another one here. DJ Uiagalelei, former Clemson and Oregon State quarterback here. My main argument is this. DJU over the last 2 years has finished as quarterback 20 and quarterback 34. Mike Norvell's quarterback in Jordan Travis, quarterback 30 in 2022, would have finished as the QB 15 had he had that one extra game that he missed. And then 2023, he finished as a QB 33, and he was QB 18 through week 10 before he got injured. And so you have a guy in DJU who has been solid for fantasy in 2 different spots the last 2 years, going to a system that has produced us top 20 potential quarterback production in Mike Norvell. I think that's a match made in heaven. Easily puts him there in the top 30 quarterbacks for me. The biggest thing is the fact that, who's he going to throw to, right? Malik Benson looks like the only real reliable receiver in that room. I do like Kyle Morlock at tight end, but all in all, right, like Florida State is a team, has an over-under of 9.5 wins. The best odds to win the conference in the ACC. If you agree with that, if you think that Florida State is going to be a contender for the ACC, you have to believe that DJU is going to overcome the receiving issues, and he's going to be good for this team. Otherwise, Florida State's easily going to lose 4, 5, 6 games. And so if you believe that Florida State's an actual contender for the ACC this year, DJU has to be going much higher than where he's going in ADP right now, which is QB 48. Last guy I'll talk about here. This one will be quick, I promise. I talked about him recently, so it'll be quick. But Josh Hoover, quarterback out of TCU here. His ADP is QB 39. I have him ranked at QB 27. He had 3 30-plus games in his 6 starts last year. He averaged 24.6 fantasy points per game in his final 6 games. That is a QB 18 pace on the year. You might be saying, like, oh, that's kind of a flash from the pan right there. It's only 6 games. Well, Sonny Dykes has been incredible for CFF the last couple of years. Max Duggan was quarterback 13 last year. Before that, Tanner Mordecai was QB 9. So this is a system that's great. Hoover's your starting guy. I'm not worried about that whatsoever. What, Ken Seals is going to come in and steal his job? Absolutely not. All right. This isn't Chandler Morris where he's going to drop dead within the first couple of weeks. All right. Hoover is an instant value right now. Absolutely a guy that's going way too late.
Yeah. Max Dugan ain't walking through that door no more. So should be all systems go for Hoover. I like these calls. I'm really interested in how DJU turns out. This is obviously his 3rd stop. Florida State just loses so much from last year's amazing team that really could have done some damage potentially had Jordan Travis not gotten injured. But, when it comes to a program like Florida State, you just don't doubt that like they will be able to restock and reload, So I think that there will be that requisite talent there. I think he's going to have better players to work with for the most part than he did certainly at Oregon State. So this sets up pretty nicely for him. And then on the Gleason point, yeah, I've just been waiting for him behind Finn for a little while now. I'm really excited to see how he takes off this year. So I think those are 3 really interesting names for sure.
All righty. Last thing we'll touch on here. Again, we only got a few minutes here. But we wanted to tell you guys, again, we talked about what we know so far, where we're kind of at with some of these guys. But now we'll look ahead a little bit, right? We're getting into fall camp. There's still some quarterback competitions to be sorted. And so, John, you and I each picked one quarterback competition that we have our eye on going into this fall camp period. And you chose the Maryland Terrapins and that quarterback situation. So why don't you go ahead and tell me what you find interesting about that quarterback competition? How do you think it's going to shake out?
Yeah, so for full transparency, I am from Maryland originally. I like the Maryland program, so I pay pretty close attention to them. That even though they are, traditionally not the powerhouse that our alma mater is on the football field, but regardless, I think they just have 3 really interesting names. I think this would have been interesting even if they didn't bring in MJ Morris. Like Cam Edge showed a little bit in that bowl game against Auburn. Billy Edwards, of course, did as well, and they boat raced Auburn. Like I love that game, and they both those guys showed a lot. And Morris, he's been frustrating because I think there's been times where you understand that tantalizing talent that he might possess, but it never felt like it got consistently unlocked during his time at NC State. So I think in a year where we're gonna have or it feels like there are fewer and fewer quarterback battles now that the transfer portal is what it is. But I think in this case with Maryland, like you have three guys with differing skill sets and all legitimate ability in their own right. So it's going to be tough for Loxley to kind of like push the right button and kind of make that decision on what this offense is going to look like, because it's going to follow very closely which quarterback he ends up picking, because you go Edwards, there might be a lot more running. Edge, we're not totally sure. Morris, probably going to throw a little bit more. So I think that this could go in so many different directions, and therefore I do think that this is a pretty interesting one. And then one to just kind of like float out to you before you get to yours. How settled do you think it is when it comes to these two transfers I'm about to mention at Kentucky? Our old pal Brock Vandegrift up there, but Gavin Wimsatt showed some times during his run at Rutgers. Do you think it's a situation where Vandegrift, it's like his job to lose? Do you think that they open on equal footing? What's your read there and your general expectations on whoever wins that job?
I mean, based on what Mark Stoops' comments have been, it seems like Vandegrift's job to lose. He talks about how Vandegrift, they think they found something special in him, which makes sense, right? Again, he's a former 5-star quarterback. If the right coaching system comes along, like they'll be able to kind of unlock something in him that's always been there, right? There's a reason why he was rated as high as he was at one point. So I think he'll get the first shot at it. I think he'd have to completely bottom out in order to lose that job at any point during the year. Quick comment on Maryland there. This is a team that I was kind of raising my eyebrow a little bit when I first saw you put it on the show sheet, because I'm like, I don't really care about the Maryland quarterback situation. It's been Talia for so long, but went back and looked. Talia, man, 2023 QB 26, 2021 QB 28, QB 20 or in 2022 he was QB 53, but he missed a couple of games that year as well. So it's been it's not like the high ceiling play, but it's a place where if you're looking for just kind of a safe system to go after, that'll probably get you a solid 20, 22 points every single week. Like, I think it's a pretty solid place to be looking. Wazoo, I mentioned this before. I'm going to get my quick thoughts on this quarterback battle here over at Wazoo. I think this is the most important quarterback competition in the country because it's Ben Arbuckle's quarterback. Look at the last 3 years with Ben Arbuckle. 2023, Cam Ward was QB 10. 2022, Austin Reed was QB 5. Bailey Zappi, back when Ben Arbuckle was the offensive analyst, it turns out he was actually a lot more involved in the play calling and the design of that offense than we initially gave him credit for. In 2021, Bailey Zappi, of course, QB 1. And so this has been one of easily the most consistent college fantasy systems to invest in a quarterback. And I'm a big believer in John Mateer. He was with the system last year. They do bring in Zevi Eckhouse from the FCS level at Bryant. They have gone back and forth. I'm not going to sugarcoat it. Like, this is a legit competition. But I do think it is going to be one of those competitions where we think about it so much, and then when Mateer starts week 1 and then plays through the whole season, we're going to be like, oh, yeah, I guess we should have just known it was going to be him. Very similar to Jalen Milroe last year for Alabama. Very similar to Drake May 2 years ago for UNC, where there's all this talk about competition, and then when the day actually comes, we're looking at it and be like, okay, yeah, we probably should have known. But wholeheartedly agree with everybody. Like, if you're drafting Mateer, you got to shoot for Eckhouse, because this system, in my opinion, is worth handcuffing. Like, I'm not usually a big handcuff guy, but when you can lock in basically a top 10 quarterback for CFF, as you mentioned before, John, they're playing a Mountain West schedule. Like, Cameron Ward was a QB 10 on the year last year, playing a Pac-12 schedule. They're going to the Mountain West basically this year with their schedule, and that's going to be absolutely incredible for whoever wins this job. So, the most important job, in my opinion. So
huge.
John, appreciate you coming on, sir. Before we get out of here, man, again, you got some stuff going on with Rotowire, a lot of stuff coming down the line. What can the people expect from you, man?
So my role during the season, I will continue to do the DraftKings main slate article each week of the season, sprinkle in some other things here and there. But we've just kind of taken the ball and run with it as far as like our best ball content. We have underdog ADP. We have some interesting new tools that our main editor Chris Benzine had kind of masterminded. He just put out an article about our projections and his kind of like thought process behind that. So that is available to subscribers. We also have strength of schedule, playoff schedule, that type of stuff. Like it very like user friendly stuff to give you that what you need to know type of information when you're drafting. So check us out over at rotowire.com. I'm pretty proud to work there and the type of stuff that we put out there for the college fantasy football community.
Yeah, these guys have been doing it a long time. They understand the needs of what people want out of this game. So absolutely go and check out their stuff over there. John, it's been a pleasure having you on. With that, we have come to the end of our show. I want to thank everyone out there for listening. If you have not already, go ahead and leave a like, comment, and subscribe. If you're watching this on the YouTube side of things, if you're on the podcast side of things, make sure you follow the show, leave the 5-star reviews wherever you can. Make sure you guys check out the rest of the Campus of Canton podcast network for shows ranging on pretty much anything you can think of related to the college fantasy game. We'll see you guys back here next Monday, where we're going to continue our Crash Course series, and we'll be talking the running backs. Until then, really appreciate you guys, and hope you have a wonderful and blessed week.